now return to chain gangs on History's Mysteries.
By 1877, the convict lease system has effectively replaced prisons in the South. In the North, though, correctional facilities have all but abandoned their use of prison labor.
Prison labor, for a variety of reasons, some having to do with trade union opposition, others having to do with the deterioration of authority structures, others having to do with inmate resistance, simply were not as economically central as convict labor turned out to be.
In the South, the incredible profits generated by the convict lease system quickly undermine any pretense of rehabilitation. With no way to oversee the lease camps, prison officials basically cede all responsibility to the lessees. A report on the Alabama penal system notes that many convicts disappeared as completely as if the earth had opened up and swallowed them.
The convict lease system was not surprisingly susceptible to all sorts of abuses because the interest of the people who were controlling and overseeing the convicts, housing them, feeding them, benefiting from their labor, was to save as much money as possible.
Whether leased to work on railroads, mines, or plantations, the conditions are uniformly miserable. Convicts are housed in ramshackle shacks or transported to the worksite in rolling cages like those used for circus animals. Often the prisoners are chained together 24 hours a day, even while in bed. They work 14 hours a day, often 7 days a week, under the constant gaze of sadistic and untrained guards with little food and inadequate sanitation.
What convicts were known for doing was the kind of work that Mississippi plantation owners, railroad owners, factory owners could not get free labor to do. So if you had to clear a malarial swamp, you could not get free labor to do it, but you could get convicts to do it because they had no choice. They would be chained together, working up to their waists in all kinds of brackish water for hour upon hour, actually having to relieve themselves in that water and then drink it, because that was their drinking supply. It was an incredibly brutal system.
The seriousness of the crime has little to do with the punishment. Ridiculously long sentences are meted out for even minor offenses without regard to age or sex. Often petty criminals are sent to the worst places.
The wildcat camps were county convict camps that were invisible to the state. There was no control over them whatsoever. And the irony of it was that these were people who were prosecuted and convicted of very small, minor offenses, and yet doing time in a wildcat camp was probably the worst place to be.
There is no relief for prisoners in the stinking, squalid convict lease camps. Those who cannot maintain the relentless work pace are whipped or subjected to other cruel tortures. One convict writes simply, "This place is 9 kinds of hell."
There is not a single instance in the history of Mississippi in which a leased convict lived through a sentence of 10 years or more.
The death rate among leased convicts skyrockets to appalling levels. Southern prisons report an average death rate that is nearly 3 times greater than in northern penitentiaries. Gunshots, malnutrition, heat stroke, and shackle poisoning caused by the chains around their ankles all take a toll on the convict population.
There really were 3 ways out of a convict camp. The first way was to escape, which was very, very difficult. The second way was self-mutilation, which was known as knocking a Joe, and it was simply taking a limb off. You might take off several toes, take off your arm from your wrist down. And it was a way of depriving the lessee of your labor. The third way out was simply to die.
Despite some public opposition, the convict lease system gains popularity across the South. Critics begin to wonder if there is anything that can be done to stop the brutality.
Legally, these camps did have to be inspected on an annual basis. The way that worked was everyone knew when they were coming. The lessees spent a day cleaning up the camp, getting their convicts dressed nicely, and putting on a nice Potemkin Village show about what the convict camp looked like.
What you have to remember, and what is so important, is that you're talking about a black convict population, and you're talking about the dregs of a supposedly inferior race. These are people who have very little sympathy among those who count in society.
The wealthy politicians and businessmen who do count find that the convict lease system has an unplanned bonus. It is a powerful weapon against organized labor.
The convict lessees are quite explicit about wanting to use convict labor precisely to drive down wages, to guarantee that trade unions among the mine workers won't form, or that if they do and go on strike, there'll be a scab replacement force readily available to put in the mines.
For years, chained convicts are successfully used as a pawn in the battle against organized labor. Then, in 1892, the practice is finally challenged by a group of militant Tennessee coal miners.
Miners armed themselves and fought the state militia in order to destroy these convict camps. They burned down the prison stockades, removed the convicts from the mines, placed them on a train, and sent them to the state capitol, saying that convicts should not be worked in competition with free labor.
Bowing to union pressure and penal reform critics, Tennessee outlaws convict leasing in 1896. Other